what's up everyone? My name is Justin and welcome to my YouTube channel about games and art. Take it from someone who's just a guy, I think Blender is incredible. It changed my life in my late 20s and now I work as a 3D designer, and I think that if I can do it, pretty much anyone can, and that's what really inspires me. Blender can play a role in everything from 3D modeling game assets to 3D printing merchandise to creating visual effects for Hollywood movies. Your first project could be a million different things, but in this series I think I want to create a high-tech holographic ELO sight like you might see in Call of Duty. I know if 15-year-old me saw that, he would have flipped out. So together we'll learn how to navigate Blender's interface, and we'll learn a lot of different modeling tools and techniques within the software, so that hopefully by the end of the series, you'll feel confident enough to create a whole array of different objects within Blender. This series is meant for people of all skill levels, including absolute beginners. Hopefully maybe you've seen at least a donut tutorial or two, but if you haven't, I think it's going to be okay. So if that sounds really cool, then make sure to hit subscribe. I'll probably have reference images of what we make down in the description, along with my Discord channel where I have a ton of awesome community members who are willing to help you anytime you get stuck. Oh, and really quick, there's no sponsor to this series, but if you do appreciate the content, I do officially have a Patreon channel down below that I'm working really hard on bringing the best add-ons, content, and project files I can to it. So, feel free to check that out. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll go see you over at my computer. So download Blender, and I'll see you in a second. Hey there everyone, so I'm genuinely excited to get started. I'm on blender.org to be able to install the application. But before we get started, I just wanted to lay down some quick notes. Like, I'm not going to teach you how to use your basic mouse and keyboard. I'm not going to show you how to install the add-on. These are just basic computer principles that I truly believe you should learn before diving into a course like this. I don't want to hold your hand the whole time, but I want to show you what's possible for everyone at all skill levels. Furthermore, when I show you the reference image of the EXP S3, which is the holographic sight we're going to work on, there's going to be a bunch of small details on there, but this is a modeling course, so we're only worried about the shape and form. For example, on this dragon here, you can see a bunch of these tiny little scales, and in professional game art, that's actually something that would be done in the baking or texturing phase, which is something we're not going to go over in this course. So in this course, we're going to go over the modeling, and maybe we can get into the smaller, crazy details by learning UV mapping and baking and texturing in a further course. So if we get really excited about our final model, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that. But so far, I want everyone to learn it. So go ahead and go to the download section, download it. And if you want to make your life a little easier, if you have another computer, an iPad, or a second monitor, my second monitor broke, so I'm actually using my MacBook, I would recommend downloading PureRef. It is completely free, and so when you download the provided reference image in the description below, you're not only going to have all the reference images you need, but if you do have PureRef, you're going to be able to open up a specific file, and I'll show you that right here. When you download that file, you'll have access to this. And we're going to have all the images at our disposal right in front of us. These are extra angles that'll be really nice to look at when we need it. Again, we're not going to be doing the small letters on the buttons, but we'll do as much as we can. But in terms of really important images, let's keep note of these because we'll also go into the actual folder and we will take those into Blender so that we can create our model with the reference images. It makes life much easier and it's a good practice. Unless you're doing something a little bit more freeform and organic or stylized. So we want to get kind of serious in here, but not too serious. We'll create something fun and we'll learn Blender along the way. So in PureRef, I am using my middle mouse to pan around, and this is just a fantastic application. So I'll put this on my other computer, and I'm going to go ahead and open up Blender, and I'll quit this and close this, and just get a fresh installation, and I'll see you guys in just a moment. Alrighty, and we're finally in Blender. I am close to a fresh install. The only thing I've added is an add-on to let me show you what buttons I'm pressing, but it's for the best. And I've also reset all of my preferences. So Blender will look just like this when you download it, and all I'm going to do is click anywhere but this box. We could create a new file like this, but it's right behind us, and I typically don't worry about the templates since they're just slight variations of all these little menus up here. So let's just click out of it, and I am going to totally overwhelm your mind, so feel free to pause, go back, slow it down, do whatever you need to do, but I want us to get the controls out of the way. I'll refer people back to this video in the future so we can learn modeling to an awesome extent here in Blender. To left click, I select things, and when I left click and then shift left click, I can select multiple objects. As well, if I left click and drag, I can select multiple objects like that as well. Before I even continue, the main usage of Blender is to move stuff around and then edit it. So to edit an object like this cube, I can go to the tab up here, and we have all these different modes. In this course, I don't believe we're going to use any of these ones except object and edit mode. And see, in edit mode, it actually exposes the changeable points of this 3D model. So for now, I'm going to go back into object mode because we don't need to edit it for now, and I want to show you more controls. Now we're going to learn how to master navigating around the viewport. This middle mouse button, I'm doing what's called an orbit. I am orbiting around my selection. So if I press middle mouse, I am moving around. If I press shift and middle mouse, I am now panning. And if I hold control and either use the scroll wheel or just control and middle mouse click, now I'm zooming in. So let's go over that one more time. Middle mouse to orbit, shift middle mouse to pan, and control middle mouse to zoom in and out. So I want to look at the bottom of this cube, so I'm going to just orbit around it. And maybe I want to look at this camera, so I'm going to orbit again and shift middle mouse to look closer at it, and maybe control middle mouse to zoom in on it. Very interesting. Now, Blender is a little bit funky by default. So let's practice moving around our camera. Nice. And first things first, we want to let Blender behave the way we want it to before we really dive deep into it. So we're going to explore the preferences menu. I'm going to go to edit and let's click on preferences. There's plenty of stuff here. So we'll go from top down and we don't have to click everything. Let's just go to interface and make sure everything is at default, which it is. The first thing I'm thinking of looking at is editing, and that's completely fine too. So then for extensions, there is an extension or two we're going to want to use. I'm going to search for loop tools. And for me, it's installed, but I recommend getting that one, and I'll type F and see if F2 is available, which it is. This is just a quicker way to add faces later on in the course, and that's installed as well. And the last one I want to check out, which is either in extensions or add-ons, is the Node Wrangler. So I'm typing Node Wrangler, and it must be in add-ons then, so I'll type that one more time. And this is really important for when we get into the shading tab, which might not happen too often in the course, but this node is just so useful because of the Control-Shift-Click, which lets us preview everything we're doing. So it looks like the main settings we're looking for is in input, and what we want to click, at least for my smaller keyboard, is emulate numpad. That way we can quickly navigate the views in Blender outside of our mouse, with just our keyboard. And if you have a bigger keyboard, you don't have to turn this on, but I'm going to turn mine on. And then in navigation, I'm going to turn on perspective and depth. And this lets the camera behave better when we select an object or a small vertice, and we want to make sure that the camera pans around it like we were trying to do with our camera earlier. So that's all I need to change there. For key map, this looks a little complicated, and I never change anything except for what the spacebar does depending on what kind of project I'm doing. So in the situation where we might want to hunt for a specific tool when we're modeling, I might set this to search. But if I were animating a lot and I just wanted to press space to check it out, I would just press play instead. I'll check out system really quick. And for my device, because I have a computer with a stronger graphics card, I'm opting in to use the optics renderer. If your computer isn't as strong or it's a Mac, use Metal, and if it's an integrated graphics card, you could use your CPU, and we're not getting into too much rendering anyways, so it's not a big deal. These should be completely fine, and we can close our preferences. So let's look into some basic object editing controls. For example, if I select this and press X, which is the sun, we're not getting into rendering right now, so I can delete it. So X is to delete things. And people always delete this default cube to start, but we're going to treat it well for now. If I zoom in, and remember, practice your orbiting around, we just want to get a basic feel for what our potential options are to transform this. And everything in 3D comes down to a variation of 3 controls. And in Blender, it's grab. So we can use the move tool, or G for grab. We can use the grab or move tool to move things around in a 3D space. And just like I used G to grab, I can press Alt G to move it back, which I happen to use a lot because things being centered directly in the world is really useful for a lot of modeling techniques. Furthermore, there's move and there's also rotate, the second most used feature in all of 3D. So we can rotate in 3 axes on pretty much every single 3D object in the world. Now, this is a good opportunity to point out something super important in 3D, and try to get a notepad or try not to blow your own mind, but it's the difference between world space and local space. Now, it's a little tough to explain, but I think if we're going to work on this model, we may as well learn a little bit more about it. If you'll notice, I've already moved this cube. However, the rotation gizmo that I've been given doesn't even follow it anymore. If I rotate it this way, I would have much preferred if this green ring had followed along with where it originally was, right? Well, it turns out it's still there, but because we're working with the world space, we're always going to get these world space based coordinates. But if I go to the transform mode up here, so remember to look at this little menu a lot, I can switch from global to local, and we can get more advanced as we continue, but for now we just only have to worry about the difference between global and local. So now you'll see that those rings are perfectly adapted. And so there might be a situation where you have something in a really funky location, but because we haven't frozen any transforms or applied anything, which I'll discuss in a moment, we're still able to keep where these transforms are supposed to be. So even in move mode, we could still have the perfect axis depending on where this is angled. So it always follows that correct direction. Now, just like grabbing and moving it back with Alt G, it's similar with the keyboard where we can press R to rotate it. And I can even press Alt R to reset that rotation, just like we did with the grab with Alt G. So we've learned about movement, and we've learned about rotation. And by the way, Blender is very forgiving with Control Z, so don't be too scared of that, unlike Unreal Engine, which is very unforgiving with it. And the third one is scale. Didn't mean to distract you right there. So we have movement, we have rotation, and now we're going to learn just a little bit of scaling. And this is really important to capture the proportions of a lot of objects. As things get more advanced, you're still going to want to be able to change the sizes of all sorts of objects in your scene. So we are scaling it on the y-axis, the x-axis, and the z-axis. And why don't we reset with Alt-S? Could you have guessed what key it was? Or press S to scale it up and down. But we always have these little transform gizmos as well. So I can go as crazy as I want, and I am in local transform mode. But if I switch to global, it can get pretty crazy as we're following the world axis coordinates now, and it's trying to figure out how to scale it along the actual world axis coordinates, which is a little more inaccurate because we've done some funky things to it. But it's not entirely detrimental. It's all about knowing the difference between object and local, and as you learn more and more Blender, this will become second nature. So you can always rewatch this, or you can ask questions on my Discord channel, and we're always willing to explain more and help. So we've covered some basic transform methods, and what I'm going to let you know now is that I never click on these. I always just leave it default. It looks like the default key for this is W, so our select box, which lets me grab things. And if I press it again, it changes the mode. Let's press it a couple times and go back to the box mode. Just to check, if I hold it down, here's our different modes. I typically leave it at this. But with this selected, I'm mostly just using G, R, and S to move my objects around in Blender without ever needing to touch these. But if you want to get a little more accurate, here's how you get a little more crazy with it. So let's say I want to scale it with S, but only in this direction, on what is the X direction. This is X, Y, and then Z would be up. So if I only want to scale it on the X axis, I'm going to press S, and then I'll press X. and it locks it onto that axis. So now I have like what could be considered a really wide building, but I want to make it taller. It looks like I'm just changing it on all sides, but if I press scale and then Z, that up axis, now we have a lot more control over which axis it's scaling at. So I'll press Ctrl Z a couple times. And again, that applies for the rotation as well. So let's say I want it to aim a certain angle towards the street, a potential fake street. I'll just press R and Z. And now change the angle without needing to change the camera angle directly and fiddling around with that camera. And then I can always press G and X, and I'm locking it in that direction, G and Y, and G and Z. Let's make a building. I'll just press S and Z. So I want to be able to thicken this building without accessing both axes. So instead of locking it in a certain direction like S and X, which is still totally viable, I can try something new by constraining just one axis. So I'll press S and Shift and Z, and now I'm scaling it without even touching the Z axis. And if I wanted to do the same thing to another, I can press S, Shift, and X or something. Now I'm only scaling it this way. Getting used to that can take some time, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I'll even move this in anywhere but the Z direction, like G, Shift, Z. Now it's not going to move up as I move this around. Doesn't apply to rotation as much, but yeah, with movement, you can totally constrain an axis, and that same thing applies to the scale. Sorry if I over-explained that, but I want to make sure everyone can get used to some simple transform tips. So we won't go too much deeper in this video. Let's reset our cube. But we can check out some of the buttons right here, and as projects get deeper, you'll get really used to this, but it's not worth becoming an expert at. For example, when I'm finished with a project, I'll simply click between these three and see what offers me the options I'm looking for. But we can always change the final resolution if we're rendering this out at the end. We can change how advanced we want the rendering to be. And most of the time, you won't even need these more advanced parameters. I'd say the ones I access the most are the wrench, so we can add all sorts of modifiers, which I'll discuss later. The data, that is sometimes used for more advanced things, like needing specific sets of data within your 3D model to help you with texturing or animation. And the last one would be the material editor, and this can get really deep and really advanced. We're not going to worry about it too much in this course, but it is worth diving into a little bit later just to help us preview what we're doing in a little bit nicer way. So that's object mode taken care of. We learned how to move, rotate, and scale. And we do have some extra options here, like I said, in these panels. For example, the surface of the material panel, we could change it to red. And in this upper bar, we could change the mode to material preview, and we'll see that it's actually red. But again, these are worth diving into once you get past the modeling phase of your course. So we'll even Control Z all that and go back to our main mode, which is the solid view. If things get a little bit intense in your modeling, you can always press the X-ray so that you can see through other objects and see what's happening. As well, you can press on the wireframe, especially when you're getting picky about the topology of your model. And we can even turn off the entire overlay so that you're a little bit more focused on the model itself rather than the grid. But I typically keep this on. And in the overlays, I don't mess with too many of this. In fact, when I'm modeling, I do not mess with this at all. But for models that are solid and not an X-ray, if it were a really complex model or I want to preview it or just show it to my friends, I'll go to the overlay and click on wireframe. And that'll let me see the entire wireframe of the model without having to be in edit mode. So I'd say most of the time, I'm having my wrench icon active during the modeling phase because I want to quickly add modifiers. It doesn't really matter which one I add right now, but you know, we're just going to get used to adding modifiers through here. And as I let you know which ones we look for, we could always search it up in here. So I'll press X to delete that modifier. Now that we've transformed this cube, again, we can press Alt G and Alt R and Alt S, and we've totally reset that cube because we've only been working in object mode and everything is back just the way it was. So we've definitely already made a lot of progress on figuring out what the heck Blender does. Let's go to this little drop down called the overlays, and I'll turn off that wireframe to bring it back to normal. And let's just go over the last of what I consider to be the most important elements of the interface. So we not only learned how to move around with our keyboard and mouse, zoom, pan, and orbit, but we can also do the same thing with our numpad. So if I press 1, that's the front, 3 is the right, and 7 is the top, even though they all look the same from this cube's angle. Now if I pressed 1 and then pressed 9, 9 means the opposite. So if I were at the right view with 3, I could press 9 and be at the left view. If I press 7 to be at the top, I can press 9 to be at the bottom. So it's getting all crazy now, so I'll press 1, and now I know I'm directly at the front, which means that this is completely symmetrical on both sides of this, especially if this were a person, this would be its front view. Shift A is the add menu, and there's all sorts of items we can add. Mostly, we'll just be adding meshes. So I could look for a sphere, and I can move it with G. And if I move it over this cube, one of the most basic modeling principles in object mode is to add a Boolean modifier, like I selected earlier. So if I go to the modifiers panel and type B for Boolean, this is set to difference mode, which means it's looking for something to make it cut itself away. Union is to join things together, and intersect is a little bit of a weird mixture of the two. So for this difference, aka subtraction mode, I can get our eyedropper and click the sphere. And even though we can't see what's happening right now, let's hide the sphere. And it cut away at our cube. And we're using the exact method, which is just an algorithm. There's a couple different algorithms. I think the newest one is manifold, which is really, really precise. But what's even more interesting is that this is live. This is a live modifier. So if we get our sphere and then move it and then hide it again, and I'm using H to do that, we'll see that it's being dynamically updated. Really cool. Now, even though I don't have this menu open often, I'm going to press N, and this is going to bring up my sidebar. I'll press N again. We could even click this little arrow over here. And also, we can emulate what the numpad is doing through these little coordinates over here on the right. I'll press X to delete this cube. And now with this modifier empty, I could even delete that with X as well. So we have a fresh restart. In this situation, this gives us access to a couple different panels, including the add-on I'm using to show you what buttons I'm clicking, but most of the time we'll have this transform menu, and the more you stare at this, the more you'll start to understand basic 3D principles. If we move it up on the Z-axis, we could see how high it's going. So one more way to orbit around is to hold down Alt, and that'll snap your orbit, just like the numpad. So if I look at the front view, I can get a better idea of just how tall this is. If I press Alt-G, this origin point is what's being read. So this point is what's being moved up 1 meter. But the entire height of our cube is 2 meters. So I'll press Alt-G again. We'll check out edit mode just for the sake of this basic introduction video, and I'll go into it. Now, I'll press A to select everything, and if I move it up, we want to get it to near a floor level. Like, that's something we typically want to do for most of our assets. I moved it up in edit mode because I didn't want to move the origin point. So we're close to floor level, but not exactly. Let's press Ctrl Z on that, and I'll use Alt to snap to the front view. We can start playing around with these options up here. These snapping options are used in a ton of different and creative ways, and the more you practice with 3D modeling, the more you wish you had a certain snapping type, and then you'll find it here. I'm going to leave it on increment, and it works very similarly to grid, but because we're not going advanced, we don't need to learn about it. But we could snap different vertices, edges, and faces together, and then for more advanced projects, based on the camera view, we could start snapping things on the face depending on the camera. So we'll leave all these at default, but I wanted to show you the snapping menu. And notice the snapping icon is on, but I'm going to show you a really good habit in Blender. What I'll do is press G to move, and then I'll hold Control. And this automatically turns on that snapping, even if it's not showing the blue icon. So on an increment or grid level, we could start getting super precise. In edit mode, I've moved it just above to exactly floor level, but if I go back into object mode, we notice that everything is still at 0. That's because I didn't move it in object mode. I only pressed tab or went to my object menu bar over here to go into edit mode, and I moved it up 1 meter. So even though all these transforms are 0, we have a perfect cube at floor level. And so understanding the difference between object and edit mode ends up being super important. Look what happens when I scale this up. It notices that it's 3 times bigger. But if I do that same thing in edit mode, it doesn't notice that at all. And a quick extra tip is that if we go to the transform pivot, we're going to be able to get a couple different types of scaling and rotation and transform methods. So let's say now that we did all this hard work to put our cube on the floor, we want to be able to scale it up from that point. Well, luckily our cursor is on that origin point. Well, what the heck is a cursor? Let's press shift and right click somewhere. Our cursor moved. Now let's see what happens if I select the 3D cursor from that panel. Now it's treating it like a new pivot point, which can be really handy depending on what you need. I'll press Ctrl Z on that, and I'll go to my 3D cursor menu with Shift S. I have to hold it down in this situation. The one I'm looking for is cursor to selected, because we want our cursor to move to where our origin point is. Now that it's back to where it was, I can go into edit mode with tab, and I'll scale it up from that point. So now it's always going to stay on the floor level, while at the same time, we're not messing with the scale. And so really quickly, I'll talk about applied transforms. What happens if you do make this 3 times bigger and then some things don't behave the way you want it to because Blender's getting fussy? It's pretty easy. We're just going to press Ctrl A, and we have the option to apply any of these. I kind of messed up the scale, so I'll apply the scale. Now let's do something kind of advanced. I'm going to rotate it with double R in a random direction, and it's keeping track of that rotation. I'll even scale it, and I'll move it. So all my transforms are messed up, and I'm getting a little concerned, and I don't know what I should do. Well, one by one, I could figure it out. I know that I kind of want to keep the location here, and I even want to keep the rotation here, but I want to keep this scale exactly at 1 for the sake of my modeling tools. But even though I kept it at these, because we learned about the local method, I can go into edit mode now and go into something like the face selection mode, so we can switch different modes over here. And now if I press something like grab on its Z axis, we still have perfect control over the direction we want to go, G and X with this face, and that's simply because we didn't apply that transform to the rotation. So now you've become object mode masters, edit mode masters, and you've learned about the difference between all these transforms. You know the difference between global and local. You know what this silly little 3D cursor does. Let's go back to it and scale it back down. You know how to reset things to your heart's content. You know about edit mode to be able to go back in and change things any way you want. I'm just using grab to move things back. And hopefully this gives you a better understanding of how the object mode and edit mode relationships work. In each of these modes, we have a lot of options that we'll get into during the modeling process, but we don't necessarily need to be experts at understanding what they all do right now, because we'll make sure to go through them throughout the course. As we get deeper into the modeling construction of this course, we're going to learn more about the outliner and collections, but this is just a simple object that we're able to rename by double clicking it. I can even call it Happy Cube if I knew how to spell. And you know, everything in this world will be alright. So we'll add more objects, we'll rename them, we'll rename the collections within them to organize everything. And so that's the outliner, that's the preferences, this is the sidebar, this is the toolbar, this is our menu bar, and last but not least, we can explore these tabs in the future, but they're simply just different variations of the modes that are offered to us within the panels, and we can even create our own panels. So if you got through all that, I genuinely hope you learned something, because I'd rather you watch this fun little video than you have to take like an expensive college course or something. So we'll learn about reference images and start our basic blockout and low poly modeling in the next video. Thanks for being patient, and I'll see you in the next one.